All right, so last little lecture on the progressive movement, we talked about The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and he also wrote Oil, which really based on you know greed, or was really about greed at that time. And let me get this bigger for you. And so also there was a something that was written that was pretty famous at the time was called "The Shame of the Cities," and that was written by Lincoln Steffens in 1902, which really um, exposed the rampant corruption in city governments and all that kind of stuff. It was written in 1902, but it was um, I think published as "The Shame of the Cities" in 1904. It was a series of magazines before that. There was other uh, articles and books that were written. In a book called "How the Other Half Lives," written as early as 1890, was about the slum conditions in big cities and things like that. So, actually, Theodore Roosevelt called these journalists muckrakers because they raked up the muck in society in order to expose that to everyone. Now, as I said in the lecture one on the progressive movement, it was a reform movement that hit the urban areas, it hit local areas, it hit on a state level and a federal level. Uh, one of the most one of the best examples of state reform was in Wisconsin with Governor Robert La Follette. He was a governor from 1901 to 1906. And he really transformed the state of Wisconsin into a laboratory for progressive ideas. He was born in a log cabin, educated at the University of Wisconsin. He was a short, muscular guy. He was a great speaker. And, back then you had great speakers. I mean, today you have teleprompters, you have speech writers. But back then, from, the late 1800s, you had people like William Jennings Bryan, who in 1896 at the Democratic National Convention gave the famous Cross of Gold speech when he said that place upon your brow this crown of thorns. Um, this was a great, um, a famous speech that he gave. It was called the Cross of Gold speech. You also had people like Robert La Follette, that was also, like I said, a great speaker. Later on, in Louisiana, we had people like Huey Long. Probably one of the best speakers that I've ever seen personally was Edwin Edwards. In fact, he just got out of prison not too long ago over there in Oakdale, and but he was a great speaker. I saw him speak in the early 1990s in Lafayette, and I remember him saying, let's lead the nation, from the rolling hills of North Louisiana to the streaming bayous of the South. Louisiana will lead the nation. Will lead the nation into a new millennium. And boy, you really got you fired up. But then, of course, not too long after that, I just went to Taco Bell and started eating a bean burrito, and I started thinking, the Louisiana lead the nation. I'm not too sure about that, but anyway, we still live in the best state, I think. But this art of speaking, of oratory, I mean, that is a lost art, unfortunately. Obama's a good speaker, yes, but it's not like in the old days. Um, anyway, Robert La Follette established a close relationship with the University of Wisconsin, and he benefited from the academics and intellectuals and professors that were there. He got their opinion. He formed a legislative reference bureau of scholars to provide the state legislature with research, advice, and help in drafting legislation. Wisconsin adopted the primary system, which was a system in which, if you were a Democrat, you would vote for the Democratic candidate that you would want representing the Democratic Party, and the same for the Republicans, whereas before oftentimes it was done just by party leaders. And so, of course, this was a perfect example of progressive reform in which people, which was, gave people a greater voice. um, he passed civil service reform legislation in which people had to take tests in order to get a state job. And this was important because it made it difficult to fire state employees because before it was completely just based on who patronage, and this was not a good idea. Also, he implemented conservationist policies, workmen's compensation, state regulation of railroads and banks, higher taxes on corporations, and the first state income tax. Well, we can kind of blame him for that. This is all called the Wisconsin idea of efficient government, which was widely publicized and copied to a large extent. On a federal level, you had people like Theodore Roosevelt, who stated that everybody should get a square deal, and he really started to enforce the Antitrust Acts of 1890, trying to break up monopolies in order to give people a better chance to kind of start their own businesses and that kind of thing. It's always a very difficult balance. I mean, we believe very strongly in the free enterprise system, but people in Theodore Roosevelt and today people would argue if you allow capitalism to go completely unchecked, then you kind of get a situation that you had in the late 1800s, in which you have monopolies, which in that sense is really not very really crushes competition, and they really control everything. And so, some people, that's not necessarily something that you want. However, if you get too involved in the economy, you kind of stifle creativity and innovation and things like that. So it's always a really, interesting balance that we have to maintain. And a lot of political debate where people get all mad at each other and that kind of thing. It's really just about that. It's really just about trying to find that balance. I mean, most people really kind of want much of the same thing. During Roosevelt's administration, they passed things like the Meat Inspection Act, which again was inspired by Sinclair's The Jungle. The Pure Food and Drug Act was also passed in 1906. You had other progressive presidents like William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson. So that kind of gives you a little bit of, a little idea, a little explanation on the progressive movement. But make sure you read the chapter very carefully.